FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 2/24/20. Man, this is the last week of this month. Man, I told you that Tesla was going to go back up. It's flirting with high territory again, flirting with its high. It's going to break 1,000. It might go up to 1,500. Take out your bubble wands, because this is certainly one of them. But you know that we love history on this show. We love to give you a historical perspective, because so many times you think, well, this never happened before. We're living in untried, untested times. But what you find out when you've been doing this as long as I have and studying history my whole life is that history, well, as Mark Twain said, it might not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. We're having that now. We've got author of a new book called Fight House and Rivalries in the White House from Truman to Trump. And it's by Tevi Troy. Tevi, you've written a number of books before. This one is particularly timely, though, isn't it?
It's true, and thank you for having me to talk about Fight House. But with books, as an author, what I find is you can never really time it. You can't say, oh, I want to have a book come out with this season or this cycle or this market upturn or downturn. It's just not really possible to do that. So you try and write the best book you can. You try and make it as evergreen as possible. And then sometimes it comes out at an opportune moment, which I think Fight House has come out right now. So as an author, I just love writing a book, not knowing exactly when it's going to come out, given what's going to be the external events and the external environment, and then just seeing when it lands and seeing how it fits in with the day's news, which is why I think you find it of interest.
Yeah. If you remember the Mueller report, Alan Dershowitz wrote an introduction to it, and he announced on Amazon that the book was ready for pre-sale, and he cleaned up on it. He just appended the whole Mueller report to the back of the book, to his intro. but that's the height of authorship opportunism, perhaps. And like you said, you have to kind of write your book, and if you're lucky, the time is going to validate it. If not, you got a book, and hopefully people are going to buy it and read it anyway.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I write these books for the long haul. I expect and hope that these books will be in the library after I'm gone, and when my children and grandchildren are around, and somebody says, hey, did anybody ever write a book about fighting in the White House in the late 20th century? And they'll say, yeah, there's that book. Or my previous book about disasters in the White House, Shall We Wake the President? That was the first historical examination of how presidents have dealt with disasters throughout our history. I also wrote books about intellectuals and the American presidency, and books about pop culture and the American president, what American presidents were interested in watching, reading, and taking in from a cultural perspective. And so with each of my books, I'm trying to look at something about the presidency, because that's what I studied, a PhD in American civilization focused in presidential history. And I also worked in the White House. So I'm trying to bring a special perspective on the White House, how the White House operates from a historian's perspective and also from a practitioner's perspective, but also looking at it through a lens that no one has yet looked at. And that's really what I've got going in Fight House, which is a book about rivalries in the White House. Everybody's talking about fighting in the White House these days. What's happened in previous administrations? What were some of the causes for fighting in the White House? What are some of the tools and levers a president has to control fighting in the White House if they so choose? So that's what I'm trying to get at in Fight House.
Okay. And I think one thing that we can definitely learn from your book and from you, and we do appreciate the fact that you've actually been there. You're not just writing as a total observer, but you're writing as somebody who's walked the walk. What we can get from you, I guess, is a perspective that we're not really going to get from others. And historically, in houses of power, whether it's the U.S., whether it's Great Britain during its ascendancy when the sun never set on the British Empire, there are always these rivalries. And there's always, they try to project an appearance of stability, right? Stability and everything is fine. Try to really just project something, but it's never really that way, is it?
Well, some of them don't even try to project stability. Some of them do, like the Obama administration was trying to put out this sense of no drama Obama, like, hey, look aside, folks, there's no fighting here. Obviously, there was fighting in the Obama White House, but they were pretty good at not only controlling it, but controlling the narrative about it so that most of the fighting we didn't know about during the time of the administration. And in my book, Fight House, I lay out a whole bunch of fights that were taking place that I wouldn't have known about if I had had to write the book during the Obama administration. Some of this stuff has only come out subsequent to the administration. So, yeah, some of the White Houses do try to give a sense that nothing to see here, folks. But there's always something going on in the White House. There's always drama. There's always intrigue. And that's what makes Fight House so fun.
So unlike maybe this White House, prior White Houses have always try to manage the public's perception of what exactly was going on there. But here, we don't really have that. There's no attempt to project a civil image. This is a tough business. We're trying to save the world, and we don't have time for niceties effectively, right?
Yeah, I would say that that's largely true. But the White House can't control the narrative necessarily. They can try to control the narrative, and they can try and control the infighting, but sometimes this stuff is beyond your control. But George W. Bush, the president for whom I worked, he was the first NBA president. He said he didn't want to have fighting in the White House. He made it very clear he didn't want to see it. He tried to set up processes that would limit fighting in the White House. And on the domestic policy side of the House, as I show in Fight House, there was relatively little infighting, so much so that the reporters complained and whined about the lack of leaks that were coming out of that White House. And at the same time, the foreign policy shop in the Bush operation was a mess. And you had Powell, Rumsfeld, Cheney, Rice, who were at each other's throats, leaking to the press all the time. And it was not a well-run operation.
Yeah. And we go back to like Carter, and they were fighting in the White House, the Carter White House, over who got to use the tennis court when. And I remember hearing a story that Jimmy Carter actually got out the schedule for the tennis court and personally assigned times to his aides when they could use it. And, maybe sometimes the president gets involved in a lot of trivial aspects. Well, certainly Carter did. Kind of reflects upon their individual management style, doesn't it?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Arcana Corporation is on the verge of bringing the world's highest grade silver mine into production. The Revenue Virginius mine in Colorado has proven improbable silver reserves grading nearly 37 ounces per ton silver with an all-in sustaining production cost of only US $8 per ounce of silver. The mine is fully permitted with infrastructure already in place, and the company has announced they plan to commence production in 2020. Achieving successful production usually results in a significant upward share price re-rating on the Lassonde curve. Arcana trades under the ticker AUN in Toronto and AUNFF in New York. To learn more, go to arcana.com. That's AURCANA.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, Carter in particular was known for being a micromanager. And in fact, there's a quote in Fight House about one of his cabinet secretaries who accuses Carter of being one of the highest paid assistant secretaries of housing in history. In the minutia of writing legislation. And it's true that there was this whole story about Carter micromanaging the use of the tennis courts. And some Carter people denied it, so there's a bit of a back and forth on it. But it clearly led to this image of Carter, the micromanager. And there's a wonderful story that Ronald Reagan's on the campaign trail in 1980, and he tells this story of a dream he had where Jimmy Carter came to him and said, "Ronnie, why do you want my job?" And Ronald Reagan says, "Jimmy, I don't want your job. I want to be president."
Which is quite funny. Certainly, later years, they don't appear to be micromanagers quite as much as Carter was. And maybe that was a reason why his tenure was less than successful, right?
And also, you can't. The job is too big.
Right.
It's just not manageable. To be worrying about the tennis courts and the minutia of writing the legislation and then doing all the other things you have to do as president. I actually thought George W. Bush was pretty good on the delegation front. And he said there were things that were in his purview and the things that were not in his purview. Obviously, there were some problems on the foreign policy side, as I said. But in general, he had a good sense of what delegation meant.
So, Tevi, I've been working with this premise, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the government has gotten so large, all of the departments, more departments, Homeland Security, everything else, it's gotten to the point where the president certainly as much as he could run things on his own many years ago. Not the way now. We saw that in the Bush White House where Cheney, much to the opposition's chagrin, really handled a lot of important matters for the Bush White House. And I think you've seen that not so much maybe in the Obama White House. And I don't really know what Pence's role is in the Trump White House. But it seems to me that it's a good trend going on, because then you need to pick that vice president, your nominee, your partner on the ticket, not just for enhancing your electability, but can I work with this guy? Can he help me get things done? Do you think that trend's going to reassert itself?
Well, the point about picking a vice president who can work well with you is so important. We saw in the Kennedy administration, as I lay out in Fight House, there was just a bitter fight between Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the vice president, and Robert F. Kennedy, who was the attorney general and the president's brother. And these are two people whom the president could not fire. And so when you have people you can't fire, that actually leads to management challenges in itself. And Kennedy had dismissive nicknames for Johnson, like Uncle Cornpone. And Johnson didn't think much of Kennedy either, called him Stunny Boy. And the two of them were at each other's throats, and it just wasn't a good way to manage things. John F. Kennedy would say, hey, you guys should treat Johnson with respect. But Robert F. Kennedy would undermine that at every turn.
Yeah, very true. And then you look at Biden in the Obama White House, he really was relegated. He did handle some matters we find out now, like the Ukraine, like China, several others. But it seemed like he was
not so well on the Ukraine front.
Well, maybe he did well there. Who knows? Depends who you talk with. But the point is that he was really seemed like he was relegated and didn't have a big role to play. Certainly not like Cheney did. And that was the immediate predecessor. So that was a step back from modern management in the White House.
Yeah, I also wonder on the Biden front, given what we see about his, shall we say, ineffectuality on the campaign trail, you wonder if he was losing a step already back then in the Obama administration that might have led to his being relegated. So you never really know when you're not up close and personal with the guy. That's another thing in the book. It's just the oral histories and the archives and the backup information after the administration is gone is so important, because you can't really always get a full picture from just the media reports. They're so beholden to certain narratives and not really to the facts on the ground.
So true. And going back to Biden, yeah, he certainly appears to be a couple of bites short of a sandwich there. And, you just wonder, really. Going back to Johnson, his vice president, Humphrey, really did nothing as far as I've been able to ascertain. I can't see where he's done a lot.
Well, I actually do talk about that in Fight House. And you would think, since Johnson was so mistreated in the Kennedy White House, and he was actually miserable. I mean, he said it was the most miserable years of his career and was just completely unhappy because of the way that they treated him with disrespect. You'd think that he would treat Humphrey better. And he actually didn't. He was very cruel to Humphrey. There are even songs written about how neglected Humphrey was. And Johnson aides, following Johnson's lead, would make Humphrey sit on his heels and wait for them. So the vice president, would have to wait for the aides before they would deign to meet with him. And there's actually a great story I have in the Fight House where a reporter says, "Don't you feel like you've lost all responsibilities and titles after something was taken away from Humphrey?" He said, "Yes, I've lost all of them, except that of being vice president." So Humphrey had a bit of a sense of humor about it. It's a great story in Fight House. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember who was the guy who said that the, who was it? No, I think it was John Nance Gardner who said that the vice presidency was worth about a bucket of spit. Was his...
he said a bucket of warm spit, and he didn't actually use the word spit. He used a more colorful word.
Right, right, exactly.
True.
Exactly. Well, hey, we really appreciate your coming on, talking about your book. We really do wish you the best of luck on it. And I guess you can find it on Amazon. Well, I know you can find it on Amazon or where other fine books used to be sold. The name of the book is Fight House, and Cutthroat White House Rivalries didn't start with Trump. Good luck on it. Any questions or comments, email us, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. and of course, our home website, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Tevi, good luck. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me to talk about Fight House. I appreciate it.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.